He needed his wife dead, but he didn't want to look like the killer. So he came up with a plan so elaborate, so cold, so meticulously constructed, that even veteran prosecutors said they had never seen anything quite like it. He went online to a website for the BDSM and kink community. He created a fake profile, using his wife's photographs, using her name, pretending to be her. He found a man, a completely innocent man, a stranger who had never met the Banfield family, never been to their neighborhood, never done anything wrong in his life. He lured that man to his house with the promise of a consensual encounter with his wife. The man arrived. Brendan Banfield shot him. Then he stabbed his wife with the knife the stranger had brought. Then his au pair, the woman he was having an affair with, fired a second shot to make sure the stranger was dead. His plan was to make it look like a home invasion, like a stranger had broken in and attacked his wife. Like Brendan Banfield was the hero who tried to stop it, he was wrong about one thing. The au pair, the 25-year-old Brazilian woman he had promised to marry, the woman he had told, "I want to get rid of my wife." She talked, and when she walked into that courtroom and sat in the witness stand and described everything, every detail, every conversation, every moment of that night, Brendan Banfield's plan collapsed completely. Stay with me, because this case has more layers than almost anything I have covered on this channel. A former IRS agent, a pediatric ICU nurse, a Brazilian au pair, a completely innocent stranger, a fake profile on a fetish website, and a 4-year-old girl who lost both her parents on the same morning. This is the story of Brendan Banfield. Let's go back to the beginning. Herndon, Virginia, a quiet, affluent suburb of Washington, D.C., the kind of place where government employees and federal agents settle down, where people build careers and raise families, and coach little league on weekends. Brendan Banfield was 40 years old, a former special agent with the Internal Revenue Service, a man whose entire career had been built around investigating crime, around following evidence, around knowing exactly how investigations work and how they can go wrong. His wife, Christine Banfield, was a pediatric intensive care nurse, a woman who spent her working life saving children, fighting for the most vulnerable patients in any hospital. Together they had a daughter, 4 years old. From the outside, the Banfield family looked like exactly the kind of family this kind of neighborhood produces. Successful, stable, American. But behind that picture, the marriage had been fracturing for years. Christine Banfield knew her husband had affairs. Multiple affairs. She had known for a long time. She had stayed. For their daughter. For the life they had built. For reasons that only make sense when you are inside a marriage that is quietly falling apart. But Brendan Banfield's latest affair was different from the others, because this time, the other woman lived in their house. Juliana Persmagalhães was 25 years old. She was from Brazil. She had come to the United States as an au pair, a live-in childcare worker. For the Banfield family, she was there to care for their 4-year-old daughter. She ate dinner at their table. She slept down the hall. She was part of the household. And at some point, exactly when is disputed, Brendan Banfield began an affair with her. He told her things a man in his position should never say. He told her he wanted to marry her. He told her he wanted to have children with her. He told her the reason he couldn't just divorce Christine was money. She would have more than he would. He didn't want to lose custody of his daughter. He didn't want to lose the house. He didn't want to lose the money. So he told Juliana Persmaglhes what he intended to do instead. In October 2022, 4 months before Christine Banfield was murdered, he told his au pair that he wanted to get rid of his wife. Brendan Banfield was a federal law enforcement agent. He knew how murder investigations work. He knew what investigators look for. He knew that a husband is always the first suspect when a wife is killed. So he needed a scapegoat, a fall guy, someone who could be blamed, someone whose presence at the scene would explain everything. He went online to a website called FetLife, a social network for the BDSM and kink community. He created a profile, not in his own name, in his wife's name, using her photographs, impersonating her. Read that again. He used his wife's photographs, her identity, to create a fake profile on a fetish website. Then he found a man, Joseph Ryan, a completely innocent man, who had no connection to the Banfield family whatsoever, who had no idea what was about to happen to him. Using his wife's fake profile, Brendan Banfield contacted Joseph Ryan. He arranged what Ryan believed would be a consensual role-play encounter, a fake home invasion scenario, something Ryan thought both parties had agreed to, something Ryan believed was safe. Joseph Ryan had no idea. He was corresponding with a husband. He had no idea. The wife had never agreed to anything. He had no idea. The profile was fake. He had no idea. He was being walked, step by step, into a trap. And Juliana Persmaglhes knew the entire plan. She testified that Brendan told her what he was doing. She testified that she knew Joseph Ryan was coming. She testified that she knew what Brendan intended. And she stayed. She did not call the police. She did not warn Christine. She did not warn Joseph Ryan. She stayed in that house. And she waited. On the morning of February 24th, 2023, Joseph Ryan arrived at the Banfield home in Reston, Virginia. He had no idea. It would be the last morning of his life. February 24th, 2023. Early morning. Reston, Virginia. Joseph Ryan arrived at the address he had been given. The address of a man whose wife he believed had invited him there. What happened inside that house was described in forensic detail by prosecutors, investigators, and ultimately by Juliana Persmaglhes herself. On the witness stand, Brendan Banfield shot Joseph Ryan. Then, while Ryan lay wounded, Brendan Banfield took the knife that Joseph Ryan had brought with him for the role-play scenario, and he used it to stab his wife, Christine Banfield, his wife of nearly 20 years, the mother of his 4-year-old daughter, a woman who spent her career saving children's lives. She was stabbed to death in her own bedroom. And when Juliana Persmaglhes saw that Joseph Ryan was still moving, she picked up the gun and she fired a second shot at point-blank range, killing him. 2 people were dead. Christine Banfield, Joseph Ryan, a 4-year-old girl, was in that house. Brendan Banfield then called 911. He told the dispatcher that a man had broken into his home, that he had found his wife being attacked, that he had shot the intruder in self-defense. He was a federal law enforcement agent. He knew exactly how to sound, exactly what to say, exactly how a man sounds when he has just witnessed something horrifying, rather than caused it. For a moment, the plan appeared to be working, and then investigators started looking more closely. The first thing that didn't add up was Joseph Ryan himself. Who was he? Why was he there? How does a completely random stranger end up dead in a suburban Virginia home at that hour of the morning? Investigators traced his digital footprint. They found FetLife. They found the profile that claimed to be Christine Banfield, but wasn't. And here is where Brendan Banfield's professional background became his biggest problem. He thought he knew how investigations work. He thought he had covered his tracks. But what he didn't account for was how thoroughly digital forensics can reconstruct a person's online life, message by message, login by login, IP address by IP address. The profile had been created from devices in the Banfield home. The messages to Joseph Ryan had been sent from those same devices. Investigators also began looking at Juliana Persmaglhes. She had been arrested 8 months after the murders, in October 2023, and in October 2024, she made a decision. She pleaded guilty to manslaughter, and she agreed to testify against the man she had once planned to marry. But here is the detail that investigators found when they returned to the crime scene 8 months after the murders. The framed photographs on the walls of the Banfield home had been changed. The photographs of Brendan and Christine Banfield that had hung on the walls for years had been taken down, and in their place, on the bedside table, in the room where Christine Banfield was murdered, was a framed photograph of Brendan Banfield and Juliana Persmaglhes together, smiling, in the room where his wife had been killed. He had also moved her clothing into the primary bedroom closet. 8 months after the murders, he was already living as if Christine Banfield had simply been removed from the picture. Literally. The trial of Brendan Banfield began in January 2026 in Fairfax County Circuit Court. It was one of the most watched true crime trials of the year. Salacious details. A federal agent on trial. A Brazilian au pair testifying against her former lover. A fetish website at the center of a murder plot. Juliana Persmaglhes took the witness stand. She told the jury everything about the affair, about the conversations where Brendan told her he wanted to get rid of Christine, about knowing Joseph Ryan was coming, about being in that house when it happened, about firing that second shot. She wept on the stand. She said, "There is nothing I could possibly do to make it up to you for your loss. There are so many regrets. This is my biggest." And then Brendan Banfield did something almost no defendant does. He took the stand himself. He looked at the jury. He called Juliana's testimony absolutely crazy. He said he loved Christine. He denied any plot. He maintained his innocence completely. The jury listened to both of them. They deliberated. In February 2026, they returned their verdict. Guilty. 2 counts of aggravated murder. 1 count of using a firearm in committing a felony. Child endangerment. Juliana Persmaglhes was sentenced separately. In April 2026, as part of her plea deal, prosecutors had recommended she be sentenced to time served. She had already been in custody since October 2023. The judge looked at her and said something that made the entire courtroom go still. She called this case the most serious manslaughter scenario this court has ever seen. She sentenced Juliana Persmaglhes to the maximum 10 years in prison, well above the recommendation. She told her, "Your actions were deliberate, self-serving, and demonstrated a profound disregard for human life. You do not deserve anything other than incarceration and a life of reflection on what you have done." June 5, 2026. Fairfax County Circuit Court, Virginia. Brendan Banfield stood before Judge Penny Ascurat, the same judge who had presided over every chapter of this case. The families of Christine Banfield and Joseph Ryan were in that courtroom. Joseph Ryan's family had waited 3 years for this moment. 3 years since an innocent man, a man who had done nothing wrong, had been lured to his death by a federal agent with a plan. Judge Ascurat looked at Brendan Banfield and spoke. She said, "The disregard of the life of your wife, someone you supposedly loved, is almost unfathomable." She described the scheme, luring a completely innocent man into your deadly trap, continuing on after the murders, without a care, and not once, thinking of the impact on your 4-year-old daughter. She called his actions evil and calculated, and then she delivered the sentence that Virginia law mandates for aggravated murder: life in prison. Brendan Banfield, former IRS special agent, former husband, former father living in a quiet Virginia suburb, will spend the rest of his life behind bars. But on that same day, Brendan Banfield still maintained his innocence. He pushed back. He said there had been dissent within the police department. He said it would have been impossible for him to have sent some of the messages. He said the investigation had been flawed. The jury of his peers had disagreed unanimously, and the judge had called his actions unfathomable. His 4-year-old daughter is now growing up without both her parents. Her mother was murdered. Her father is in prison for life. She was in that house on the morning of February 24, 2023. The judge said Brendan Banfield took everything from her. Christine Banfield was a pediatric intensive care nurse. She spent her career fighting for children who were too small to fight for themselves. She was killed in her own bedroom by the man who was supposed to protect her, with a knife brought by a stranger who had no idea he was being used. Joseph Ryan was innocent. Completely. Entirely. He had done nothing wrong. He responded to a message he believed was genuine. He went to an address he had been given. He was shot twice. He died in a stranger's home for no reason except that a man needed a scapegoat. His family sat in that courtroom for 3 years of hearings and testimony and legal proceedings, waiting for someone to say clearly what they already knew, that Joseph Ryan did not deserve what happened to him and Juliana Persmaglhes, the young woman at the center of it all, will serve approximately 4 years, with credit for time already served. She will be out before she turns 30. Whether that is justice for the role she played is a question people are still debating. There is one detail from this case that I have not been able to stop thinking about. When investigators returned to the crime scene 8 months after the murders, the framed photos of Christine Banfield had been removed from the walls. Someone had already begun erasing her from the home she had lived in, from the walls she had decorated, from the bedroom where she had been killed. Her photograph replaced by one of the men who killed her and the woman he had done it for. That detail, more than any other in this case, tells you everything you need to know about who Brendan Banfield is. Christine Banfield saved children's lives for a living. She was killed by her husband in her own home. Joseph Ryan was a stranger who answered a message he believed was genuine. He was lured to his death by a man who needed him to take the blame. A 4-year-old girl lost both her parents on the same morning. On June 5, 2026, Brendan Banfield was sentenced to life in prison. He will never leave. If this story moved you, hit the like button. It helps this channel reach more people who need to hear stories like this. Subscribe for more deep dives and drop a comment below, because I need to know. Do you think Juliana Persmaglhes deserved a heavier sentence, or was 10 years fair, given that she testified against him